All right, welcome everyone to Science on the Sound. We are super excited to have our lead aquarist, Emily Bjornsgard, with us today. Science on the Sound is our monthly speaker series here at the Mass Center Aquarium of Highline College. And so today I am live streaming, and so is Emily, from the Mass Center Aquarium down on Redondo Beach. If you're new to our speaker series, welcome. We are the Marine Science Classroom and Community Aquarium for Highline College. We're open and free to the public every Saturday, 10 to 2. So you can come down, say hi to one of us, or check out some of the cool animals that Emily will be talking about today. And so we have over 250 different native species from Puget Sound in our aquarium. We're a flow-through system, so if you ever see water falling from the floor of our aquarium, that is good. That means our pumps are working. We have a bunch of different skeletons here too, from our 38-foot gray whale to our 3-foot little river otter that we have. And we see roughly 14,000 visitors a year, which is pretty awesome. Like today we had 303 visitors. So thank you to those of you who visit us today and are joining us virtually to learn. So if you have any questions, you can find our contact information on our website, which is highline.edu or masscenter.highline.edu, excuse me, where you can find our open hours, our contact information, and so much more about what we do here at the Mass Center Aquarium. So I don't want to take any more time. So we are going to talk to Emily today, not help with Rhoda. Sorry about that typo there. But we will be talking to Emily about marine life and photos. So Emily Bjornsgard, she, her pronouns, is our lead aquarist here at the Mass Center Aquarium. She works with over 250 native species from the Salish Sea. In her spare time, she loves to explore the Pacific Northwest with camera and hand, and probably the other hand free for looking at all the other cool creatures that are in the sound, taking photos and videos of them, and of the incredible creatures that she encounters, not only out in the wild, but also in our aquarium too. So if you follow our Facebook, Instagram, or any of our social medias, you probably see some of her photos and videos up there also. So without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to turn it over to Emily so she can talk about her time as an aquarist and how that has affected her ability to be a great marine life photographer.
All right, thank you, Ariel. Let's share my screen here. So we will be talking about marine life and photos with me, Emily Bjornsgard. And so let's get this here. A little bit more about me. I graduated a couple different times from a variety of colleges in the Pacific Northwest. I went to Grace Harbor College in Aberdeen, Washington, and graduated with a Associate of Arts degree and transferred to Western Washington University, where I earned my Bachelor's of Science with a biology major with a marine emphasis. And then in 2020, 2021, I went to the Oregon Coast Community College down in Newport, Oregon for their aquarium science program, which I finished up in 2021. I stuck around that area for about 9 months, worked in a couple of the facilities down there, and then moved back to Washington. I worked at Sea Discovery Center in Poulsbo for about a year, and then now I am here at the Mass Center as an aquarist. And so all the logos on the screen are just the different places that I've either worked or volunteered. They've all played parts in making me the aquarist that I am today, and also the marine life photographer that I am today. So shout outs to everybody. You're all great. Ariel gave a quick overview of the Mass Center, but this is just an incredible facility, tiny, down in Redondo Beach. So if you're in Seattle, you go south. If you're in Tacoma, you go north. We're right in between. We've got all sorts of animals out in our aquarium at the end of the pier, and then all of our gallery exhibits are in the first building. So as the lead aquarist here at the Mass Center, I am the lead of the animal care team, and I am in charge of maintaining any of the life support equipment, so any of the plumbing, the pumps, the electricity, making sure it's all functioning in the aquarium, as well as keeping track and making sure that all the living components of the aquarium, that is the animals, are healthy and thriving in their exhibits. I work with collecting new animals for the aquarium. So this last week, I was out diving at one of the local dive sites and found some new animals for the aquarium. So if you are local who comes to Mass often, come check out some of our new animals that may be on exhibit now. And so I both do intertidal collections. So we're at the beach at low tide. And then I also scuba dive. As you can see here, I was taking a giant leap off the end of the Mass dock. I also work with building new exhibits and redesigning old exhibits in the Mass Center. And so our aquarium is always changing. So we have new tanks that come in. We change out which animals we are focusing on. So that's a really big part of my job and a really exciting, creative part of my job that I love. So just to kind of familiarize everybody with the terms that I will be using throughout this talk, the Washington coastline is incredible. It is very diverse in the different habitats that you can find. And this is a bit of a generalization, but when I'm talking about the outer coast, that is from Long Beach Peninsula to Neah Bay. And so that is going to be the big, long, sandy beaches that people think of razor clamming, and then the big rocky shores, the sea stacks, are out more on the exposed, big crashing waves of the outer coast. The Salish Sea includes Puget Sound, which is from Olympia up through Bellingham and the San Juan Islands. It also includes the Strait of Juan de Fuca, which is from Cape Flattery into the Puget Sound, and the Strait of Georgia up into Canada. The Salish Sea is one of the larger inland seas that we have in the US, and it is also very deep. One of the deepest point is over 2,000 feet. And this whole, even though it stretches into Canada, it is one large ecosystem. So the animals don't know where the boundary is. So we talk about it as one big area rather than splitting it up into smaller areas. And like I said, the Washington coast is very varied and it has diverse habitats. We've got the rocky sea stacks of the northern Washington coast, so Neah Bay area, La Push. And then we've got the sandy beaches that you think razor clamming, you think surfing, you think Long Beach and Westport. And then once you get into the Strait of Juan de Fuca and the Puget Sound, you start to see these rockier beaches that aren't quite as expansive, but they have just as many animals, sometimes more in some areas. These low tide areas in the summertime can be covered in kelp, which often yields a lot of different animals that hide in the kelp. So you want to be really careful when you walk through that, both for yourself and for the animals. But there are so many things to be seen in these habitats. So throughout this talk, I'll be touching on a couple different topics. I will be talking about aquariums as living art and kind of what that means and how I approach different design projects as an aquarist. And then I'll talk about taking photos. I have some hopefully helpful tips that I've used throughout my time taking photos thus far. And then some general tide pool safety tips. Every time I talk about tide pooling and what that includes, I always want to make sure that everybody's aware of some of the safety tips that are important for taking a trek out to the beach. So none of these photos are of exhibits that I have personally designed. They're all ones that I've admired from other aquariums. So be sure to check out any of the photos that are listed that are not mine. They will have the location that they were taken. The Oregon Coast Aquarium in their previous Sandy Shores gallery, it was just recently revamped, so I'm excited to check that out. They have and still have these small, what I like to call jewel exhibits. They focus on specific animals, and so this one focused on some eelgrass area animals. So this is a coxcomb fish, which is eel-like, and it's hiding in an urchin test. Jellies are just incredible to see in an aquarium because they are just constantly flowing and moving around and seemingly nothing, but They have a lot of life support that is that it allows them to look so ethereal in the exhibits there, and the starkness of the blue background with the rich brown of the sea nettles is just one of my favorite things to see in an aquarium. And then on the right-hand side there is a piling exhibit from Point Defiance's Pacific Seas Aquarium. And this type of piling is often a created thing for the exhibit, for the tank itself. And it will be made to replicate a habitat that these animals would be found in nature. And so it's bringing the nature into a very visible exhibit. And so when I'm thinking about creating an aquarium, again, the California Currents tank, not mine, but it was a great example of this. I always think about whether I'm trying to create a habitat type tank or a statement tank. And I'll talk about a little bit about what the two, what the differences are between them. A habitat tank is one where you're trying to replicate the habitat these animals are coming from. Likely it's all animals that are from a certain location or from a certain type of area. It's usually a pretty large space to the average size of the animal. That doesn't mean that the exhibit is large. It could be a 20-gallon tank, but if your average animal size in that tank is an inch long, it's going to be quite big for the size of the animal, so that you can get a variety of different animals and have a higher biodiversity, higher amount of different species. These typically have natural theming, so whether that's real or artificial seaweeds, algae. In this tank, they used artificial giant kelp to mimic the California, nearshore California currents. So that's looking at some of the animals that are found along the California coast. And it's really looking to replicate a specific environment, so that it's showing people what that environment looks like in reality. On the other hand, a statement tank may not be as natural looking, but it will always accomplish the same animal needs. It will make sure it meets the needs of the animal, but it will focus on something. There's something that you're trying to get across in this statement piece. It's for me, it tends to be a lower biodiversity, so it may be focused on one animal or one type of animal. In this case, this is our Pacific hagfish display. And because hagfish are one of the first animals that happen upon whale falls, and they go in and that's their role in the ecosystem, is they are the first animals to start breaking down that whale fall. We wanted to put a marine mammal skeleton skull that we had cleaned in with the hagfish to make that, to really make that statement that this is their role in the ecosystem. And so it's one animal in this exhibit, and the theming may not be natural. In this case, it's relatively natural, but it's not something that we would naturally put into an aquarium tank. And we want the statement tank to leave a visitor or a student or someone with either questions or a feeling that, like, wow, I didn't know that this is what they did in the wild. So we want to really provoke that emotion in this type of a tank. So it's an emphasis on something. In this case, it was the emphasis on the hagfish's role in the environment. In addition to creating brand new exhibits, I will often change old exhibits into something new. This is one of the tanks at the Math Center, and it's had a couple different iterations in the 9 months that I've been here. I'm sure it will have many more as it continues to evolve. And so we'll go through kind of the steps that I have taken to get this where it is now, and a few of the ideas that I have for the future for this tank. So when I started, this tank had a focus on squat lobsters. So squat lobsters are a crustacean that are found in the Hood Canal of Puget Sound. And so with that, they are found, there wasn't a lot of different types of display in here because it was just the squat lobsters. You can see a few. There's one here. There's a couple on the wall here. There's another one hiding back here. But I knew that I wanted to do some changes to this exhibit because it wasn't really popping. There wasn't that I want to go see this tank. I want to go check out what's in it. And so There was a lot of barnacles. That's something we get seasonally here. And it was just, I knew there was something that I wanted to change. So the first redesign that I did, I warmed up the lighting, so I made it more orange rather than blue. The squat lobsters went to live in a different tank, and I brought in some dock shrimp, which are a very common species that we see here at the Mass Center and in the areas around us. And I turned this more into a habitat tank that we see in the near shore here at Redondo Beach. I moved the strawberry anemones, the little pink anemones, out of the tank and put them with a different one for the time being, because the water flow, they prefer higher current. It was a pretty low current tank, so I moved them out. We've added some juvenile stickleback, which added some dynamic movement in the midwater, and then the eelgrass was added to make it more dynamic, and it would flow in the current that was in there. So it just kind of lightened up the tank a little bit. And then recently, this is still a work in progress, but we are working to arrange our animals in a more thoughtful way. And so this tank is going to turn into our colorful rocky reef tank. So you see, we brought the strawberry anemones back here and turned up the flow, so they have a nice flow pattern in there. We have some scallops in here. These orange are cup corals. So we do have corals in the Salish Sea, and we wanted to make sure they got shown off. And the stickleback, of course, stayed because they are a wonderful midwater animal that you can see moving back and forth. And so they add that dynamic. We are also working on making a concrete background. So it's more of a rocky wall that the strawberry anemones will eventually colonize and grow over. So this tank is still a work in progress, but that's kind of the steps that I have used to adapt it and make it more dynamic and interesting for people to see. In the aquarium science program, one of the classes that I took was an exhibits and interpretation class. So it was how to design exhibits, what are some of the ways to make an impact in an exhibit, and also how do we talk about that exhibit. And so these are just a few of the things that I think about when trying to design an exhibit. We think about the research design. So has this animal been displayed before? Has it been displayed here? Has it been displayed somewhere else? What does it need to be a healthy and a thriving animal on exhibit? Does it cohabitate with other animals well? Does it need to be alone? What does it eat? How active is it? How big of an exhibit does it need? And then also thinking about the life support concerns. With the strawberry anemones, we knew they needed a higher flow, and so can this tank support healthy strawberry anemones? So we think about all of the life support concerns. We also think about what can people learn from this exhibit. And so are we showing something that's local, which is what our goal is here, since we are all local animals? Are we showing something that's that you might not see somewhere else, that you might not be able to go to the beach and find? And so we want to both inspire and generate that emotional connection, like with the hagfish, and we want to provoke, so generate an action. So I saw this animal at the aquarium, I want to go learn more about it. And sometimes things don't go as planned. These were a couple different examples where they're animals, they don't always do what you expect them to do. These green urchins particularly like to pick things up and bring them around. This one here on the right was bringing a golf ball with it throughout the exhibit, and I just decided that sure, it can pack the golf ball around. This is an artificial eelgrass plant that this urchin also decided to pack around the tank. And so I waited for it to drop it and then reburied it. Here it looks a little bit drastic, but it was a red cucumber, which tends to bury in between rocks and it'll live in crevices. And so it is perfectly fine. It was just working its way through this grate, which was separating some baby skates from other animals. And so it doesn't always look great. So when this happens, you just plan and replan and rework your plan. And of course, animal health and human safety is always a priority when designing an exhibit. So touch pools are fantastic. You can find all sorts of animals in them, but not all animals will do well in a touch pool. For example, this is a rockfish. Rockfish have spines that can be venomous. We don't want to put any rockfish in a touch pool. And so you always want to consider the animal's health and also the health of any people who may be interacting with those animals, either directly or indirectly. And one of my favorite things about aquariums is that they show so much diversity of what there is. Here at the Mass Center, we focus on local animals. So we're looking at the diversity of our local animals, but Point Defiance Zoo and Aquarium has all sorts of animals from all over the world. I've also got some animals here from the Seattle Aquarium, from down in Oregon. And just being able to go and see these animals in person, where usually you wouldn't, in the wild, you wouldn't be able to see them unless you're scuba diving or if you're on some sort of research boat. And so just being able to display all of these animals, whether they can be found at your beach or across the world, is just a wonderful privilege for me. And I hope that people who come visit my center or any aquarium, that you can really connect with the marine world around us. And so on to part two. I have been taking marine life photos for about 10 years or so. I'm by no means a professional, but I have taken, I would say, tens of thousands of photos. So I hope I have some tips and tricks that I can give. So I have a camera. You can see in the photo, it's not fancy. I'm not it's super technical when it comes to cameras, so it's more of a point and shoot. But I have my camera for any long range photos that I might want to take, birds and mammals in particular. And then I have my phone that I use for up close photos, photos when I need to not be packing something large. If I'm walking around the tide pools and I don't want to drop my camera, I'll bring my phone. So there are pros and cons to both of them. I try to have both on me if I know that I'm going to go out and take photos, but usually I have at least one of them with me in case the impromptu photo opportunity comes up. So taking photos in an aquarium is different than taking photos in the tide pools, even if you may be photographing the same thing. In an aquarium, the space is a lot more controlled, so it's not, falling over rocks, and it's not the waves are going to come in, the tide's going to rise. You or the staff there will know what animals are in the exhibits, so they are known species rather than finding potentially new species. And aquariums are also typically, unless it's an outdoor aquarium, not dependent on weather patterns. So you could go when it's hailing and storming outside, and the animals will be in a dry place for you to take photos, and your cameras won't get wet. A few tips about just generally taking photos in aquariums. Be sure to ask staff or volunteers or look for signs before taking photos. Most of the time it's not a big deal, but especially with like octopus, you want to make sure that your flash is for sure off because they can be very sensitive to that. Other animals will also be sensitive to flash. And if you can bring your camera or your phone or whatever the lens is that you're using, you can bring it closer to the aquarium window. You will have less glare, and it will help your photo turn out better. And if you're on a time limit, I always set my phone to video and then go back through and screenshot or take clips of the video. It's easier than trying to get a bunch of blurry photos as I go through. Here is an example. A picture speaks 1,000 words. How about two? If you take multiple photos as you're going around, one, you'll get multiple angles. You'll also get different positions. In aquariums, we try not to anthropomorphize or put human emotions onto animals. However, in a photo, it can be part of that generating an emotion or an action. So these two photos were of the same anemone, the same clownfish, in the same day. It was within a couple minutes, but they're two very different photos and the emotions that these photos evoke. And these were some clownfish down in the aquarium science program while I was there, and just one of my favorites. I also encourage you to take opportunities as they come. I always try to have some sort of picture taking device on me, whether it's my camera or my phone. This rainbow rockfish was from Hatfield Marine Science Center. There was a skylight above the tank, and so at very certain times of the day, the sunlight would come through and create this rainbow effect. And so I like this picture because it looks like the rockfish is handing you a rainbow. And then the other two, the king of the rock is a scaly head sculpin we had here at Mass that I thought looked particularly grand. And then the whoops photo is a pigeon guillemot eating a fish that was maybe a little bit too big for it. And you just never know when opportunities to take photos of these animals are going to come up, whether you're in the wild or if you're in an aquarium. So it's always nice to have a camera on you to capture these fun moments. And sometimes whoops photos can be the best ones. So on the left there, this is an ochre star. So ochre stars have 5 arms. Though when I looked at this, the surface of the water was so still that it looked like it was not an ochre star. It looked more like a sunflower star, which we do not have here at Mast. And so I like to call this an imperfect reflection. It made it look like it was something very different, but it was still an interesting photo nonetheless. And then here, you never know how fish are going to react. I was taking a photo of the sailfin sculpin, you can see here in the back with its big sail fin. And then this smaller scaly head came up, and now it looks like he's the sailfin. So you never know what's going to happen. Enjoy the whoops photos as much as you enjoy the dramatic rainbow rockfish photos. And on the other hand, taking photos in the tide pools is an uncontrolled environment. We don't control the weather, we don't control the tides, but we can use them and enjoy that space if we plan accordingly. And you also never know what animals you're going to find. You may have a general idea of what other people have found at these sites, but every time you go out to the tide pools is a new experience, and that's one of my favorite things about tide pooling is you never really know what you're going to find. And so I put this slide, who needs animals? I definitely do. I love finding animals, but I do also like taking a step back and looking at the environment around me. So here on the left was down in Oregon. It was one of the rocky intertidal areas where it was much too high of a tide to actually go look for the animals, but the crashing waves just were incredible. And so I encourage you also not only to look for the animals, but also just enjoy the area around you and just the beauty of nature. One thing I'll do if I'm trying to photograph something, but I'm not really happy with the photo, is I will change the angle of how I'm looking at that thing. This is a cup and saucer algae, which is really interesting. It grows a circular cup at the top, and then it's got blades that will come out around the base that form a saucer. And so you can't really see it from the top. You can see the circular cup, but you don't see the whole cup and saucer. And so if you change that angle, you get down low, you can start to see the whole shape of the algae. Same thing with this scary northern kelp crab. It looks scary from the front. They're not that scary. They try to be. But then when you lower yourself and look straight on, you get the scary look that the crab is going for. And there's a lot of little tiny things that you can find intertidally that are, smaller than an inch, even much smaller than an inch. And so you always want to look for those small moments. If you are going to handle animals, and different people have different opinions on handling animals in the intertidal zone, you always want to make sure you know exactly what species you are handling, because there are some that are not safe to handle, whether it's for your safety or the animal safety. And always handle with care if you are going to handle something. In this photo here on the left, this is a red sponge dorid. They don't get much bigger than about 3/4 of an inch. And so you can see this is my hand here. I left it in the water, and I wasn't actually touching the dorid itself, the sea slug itself. I was holding the piece of algae that it was sitting on. So in this way, it's a little less impact on the animal itself. And then also just take a look for special moments. This one was one I actually didn't notice until I went back and edited my photos. This is a hermit crab, a hairy hermit, I believe, and it had just recently molted. And so this is its shed exoskeleton, and you can see that it's a little bit squishy. And if you look even closer here, this is part of the I Spy that I play with any of my photos after I've taken them. You can see that not only did it recently molt, but it very recently molted because its legs are still a little bit crooked. And that's from squeezing its whole body out of this small opening at the back of its molt. And so it's always, you find something new when you're out in the intertidal zone, but you can also find something new in your photos after you've come back from the intertidal zone. And so this is one of the times when I recommend using a camera or something with a longer zoom than most phones can do. Some phones can do pretty good zoom, but if you want a really crisp image, sometimes the camera's the way to go. With birds, it's not there's not necessarily a mandated distance to stay away from them with most birds, but it is important to give them their space because they are living animals and we want to be respectful of them. And they're also very fast. So if you give them a little bit more distance and you're able to zoom in, you might get to see some of the details that you wouldn't necessarily see if you get a little bit closer. And so in the middle here, this is a pigeon guillemot in full breeding plumage. And you can see its brilliant red feet, and it's looking at me, so I wouldn't want to necessarily get any closer than that. But you can see how it's perching on the rock. This one was had just come in as a seabird. They come in to shore. This was early spring. Here is a oyster catcher. They are also pretty flighty, no pun intended, and so they are known to kind of back off if you get too close. But you can see even in this photo, even though I'm a ways away with the zoom, you can see the bright orange of the beak, the bright eye. And so you want to always slow down when you're working or when you're photographing birds and remain a good distance away. And then with marine mammals, they are protected under the Marine Mammal Protection Act. And so if they are looking at you and moving away, you are too close and you need to remove yourself. Here with this harbor seal pup was down in Waldport. It was on a sand bar under the bridge. So if you've been to Waldport, there's a bridge over the river, and you can stand on the bridge and watch the seals below. Of course, you can't get any closer with the bridge, so that's a nice way to observe. Same here with these California sea lions. It was from above, they were farther down below. So keeping that space is not only important for your health and safety, it is the law that you need to give them their space. So a camera comes in handy for that. In this photo was one of the first times I'd ever seen an orca. It was from shore, which was really, really cool. And so having that long range camera on me was really helpful because I could see the orcas from shore. And finally, share your photos. I don't know if I've ever met somebody who I've said, hey, do you want to see this fill in the blank photo of the marine life animal? And they say, yes, of course I do. So share them on social media. There's a Facebook group called Pacific Coast Tide Pooling and Beachcombing Identification and Appreciation. It's a very long title, but it's a great Facebook group if you want to share any kind of tide pooling, beachcombing photos. And it's along the whole West Coast. So anywhere from, I've seen California, I want to say up to Alaska, but at least up to Washington. And if you see any sea star photos, whether they are healthy or not so healthy, you can share them with the sea star wasting monitoring group, which is through UC Santa Cruz, I think. And then any photos that you take of animals, you can always share on iNaturalist, which is a source that scientists will use to collect data sometimes. So it is a great source of photos. So finally, on to tide pool safety. While tide pooling, it's really important to, of course, check the tides. The tides change daily, and it also changes based on location. So if it's a low tide here at Redondo Beach, it will not necessarily be a low tide at Saltwater State Park, or Saltwater State Park is right next to us. Salt Creek, which is up near Port Angeles, it's about 3 hours drive from Redondo Beach. If it's a low tide here, it is likely almost a high tide at Salt Creek. So the tide changes, and it changes depending on your location. So you always want to use a tide chart, whether that's on your phone, on the internet, or you can get paper copies for different locations. And I tend, if I'm going tide pooling, I tend to look for anything that is a 0 foot tide or lower. So negative tides means that the low tide is a certain amount lower than the average low tide. 0 is the average low tide for your location. So if you have a -3, which is almost as low as it gets here in Redondo Beach, it means it's 3 feet lower than your average low tide in the area. And so you're going to see 3 feet more that's usually covered in water. So you will see animals likely that that are not typically uncovered by the tides. And tide charts also show predictions. So if you're checking the tide charts, you also want to check the weather, because wind and wave action can also affect how low the actual tide is. Besides checking the tides and checking the weather, once you get to the beach, whether you're at an exposed rocky intertidal zone along the outer coast or at one of the more protected sites on the inner coast in the Salish Sea, it's always important to watch the water as you're there. Throughout the Salish Sea, we do get boat traffic, and those boats can produce waves that are temporary, but they can cause a little bit of a water level rise. If you're out in boots, you may get them flooded. So always watch the waves, watch what kind of boat traffic's going by if you're in a more protected area. And you want to plan ahead as far as clothing. If you're on a sandy beach, you may not wear shoes. If you're on any kind of rocky beach here in the Salish Sea, especially right now, highly recommend at least sneakers, because barnacles will live all over and they're very sharp. You also want to plan for the type of year. Mid-July is going to be warm and sunny, hopefully. Mid-December, it could be snowing and 30 degrees. So you want to plan ahead for whatever your area of tide pooling is going to be the experience of that time. And so wrap that all up into a couple of tide pooling tips. Be safe, but also have fun. I have some great friends that I'll go tide pooling with occasionally, and it's a fun thing to do either by yourself. It can be relaxing, or it can be a great group event. If you are planning to handle marine life, know what animals you are handling. Maybe check out a reference guide before you go for the location, and only touch animals that you are sure are safe to touch, and even then handle with care and respect. Watch the water all the time, especially on windy days. It can kick up waves that aren't necessarily in the predictions. And take your time, like I showed the photos at the beginning. The beaches of the Salish Sea, especially in the next couple months, will start to be coated in different types of algae. Algae can be very slippery, so you want to watch your footing. If possible, walk on bare rock, because that means you're not stepping on any animals. And you want to just make sure that bare rock is not slippery. Algae definitely is. If you are going with people, make sure that you all have a plan if someone gets hurt. It's always good to plan ahead. If you aren't going with someone, if you're going by yourself, I always recommend you want to tell somebody, because if something happens when you're out at the beach, you want someone to know that that you're supposed to be back at a certain time. So it's always good to plan ahead. And so this was a quote that I loved from one of my aquarium science instructors down at the Oregon Coast Community College. And he said, "You can't protect what you don't love, and you can't love what you can't see." So one of my biggest things, both as a photographer and as an aquarist, is that I ultimately want people to want to protect these animals. And you can't do that without loving them. And I love them because I've seen them. And so in order for other people to want to protect them, I want them to be able to see them so that they can appreciate them and then go to protect them. So that's just kind of, in a nutshell, exactly what I'm working for, both in my professional and my personal work that I've been doing. And so if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in any kind of chat that this is streamed on. You can also contact me both on social media, or you can contact the MASS team here on social media or on our website. And yeah, thank you all for listening.
Thank you so much, Emily. That was really exciting. I love seeing all the different photos. So I have a few personal questions for you. And if you do have a question, you can drop it into the chat box if you're seeing this via YouTube. And we'll continue monitoring the comment sections both on our social media and on our YouTube page at later dates too. So first question I have is, what is the most challenging tank you have designed?
One that I've designed. Are you thinking as far as animals in it, or life support components, or just anything?
Anything.
I would say most challenging that I've designed. There was a tank that temporarily here at MAST I had turned into a tidal tank, so it would flush every couple minutes as it filled. And that wasn't necessarily a hard tank to keep, but it was definitely one that I put a lot of planning into to make sure that no animals flushed out every time it flushed. So there was a cover on the outflow, and made sure that there was nothing smaller that could get stuck in that, because it was definitely one that took a lot of planning.
So even the tiniest tanks can be the most challenging.
For sure, yeah. Sometimes the tiniest tanks are more challenging because there's a lot more water quality to balance, even if it's a flow-through facility like ours is. You want to make sure that it's not going to get too cold, it's not going to get too hot, it's going to have enough space for the animals. So I would say the smaller tanks are usually more challenging than the bigger ones.
Okay. So then what was the most fun you've had putting a tank together? Like what's your I will remember this tank forever?
I would say creating pilings for one of the tanks here. Probably this second round. I'm now on round 2 of pilings. But the sense of accomplishment of actually creating these and then getting them put in the tank, even though the first round had a couple things I worked out, that was a big accomplishment, I would say. So and then the first closed system tank that I put together with all the life support and everything it needed and saw it up and running, that was also a big one. So nice. From a tank in a garage with a filter to animals in the tank and running and people seeing it, that was very, very rewarding.
So another question about your tanks, you're talking about in a garage. When did you build or design your first tank? Because I'm assuming that was prior to aquarium school.
So I've had tanks since I was little. I had freshwater fish tanks when I was quite young. But those were relatively, you get the kit, the 20-gallon kit. You've got the hang-on back filter with the heater, and they're not super complicated, but that was one of the first experience I had with fish. And then really putting all the life support together was something I learned at the aquarium science program. So yeah.
Awesome. So you didn't start with a little goldfish bowl. Yours was an actual filter system.
No, I had an actual filter system on my tank. But then I did have I think at one point 4 tanks in my bedroom, and my mom was like, "That's too many." So then I moved to aquarium science, and I do it as a job now. So.
You moved from the hobbyist to getting paid to do it.
Definitely, awesome.
Yeah. So talking about some of your hobbies, do you, when you are selecting your camera or your equipment or your phone for taking these photos, do you need a really fancy camera or a camera lens? You see photographers on the beach who have this giant zoom lens, right? I know those are really expensive. So the people who might be watching this might not be able to afford something like that. Or like me, I would never want to take that out near the water. It would probably be sealed in a box forever. So what kind of equipment do you have? What would you recommend?
So like I said, I'm not a professional. I don't have the, 3 foot long lens. My camera is, I believe, a Nikon. It's probably 12 years old. I got it as a child. Maybe it's even 15 years old at this point. I got it like as a Christmas present. And I've changed the batteries probably 3 or 4 times at this point. But it has, I think, 42 times zoom, and so that's what I use it for. And it's got a sport mode, so it's made for sports, but it has a really fast aperture, and so it will take photos really quickly. And so that's what I look for marine mammals and for birds, because it can actually capture them before they fly away or swim away. And so I use that. I don't know how much it would be now, but it is, again, pretty old. So I'm sure it's something you could find at a thrift store or something like that. Of course, newer is sometimes better, but before my current phone, I had an iPhone 6. So, it's more about being comfortable with the equipment that you're using rather than the price of the equipment that I found. Because when I changed phones recently, I upgraded, but I had my other phone for 3.5, 4 years. And so I was really good at getting those photos with that phone. Even though it wasn't the best quality, I was familiar with it. So it still worked pretty well. So I would say whatever you have, just get comfortable with it, and you'll find success.
Nice. So it's the photographer, not the equipment.
That's what I would say. I don't know if that's the actual truth, but I would say that. So
awesome.
Hopefully that's encouraging.
So what is the most challenging animal you have ever photographed?
Marine mammals, especially non-pinnipeds. So pinnipeds, seals, and sea lions on the beach they don't move a ton, but if you're trying to photograph like porpoises or whales, they appear for like 3 seconds and then they disappear forever. So that can be challenging. I would also say things that are really, really small. If you don't have what's called a macro lens that really zooms in, that can be difficult because trying to get your phone to focus on it can be a challenge. But yeah, I would say anything that's moving really fast and is far away, it can be difficult to track. But different things have different challenges. So either really, really tiny or really, really fast. Those are probably the 2 most difficult.
Okay, so basically bring a hand lens if you need to find something smaller, and then you're kind of out of luck if it's at a distance and running, I guess.
Yeah, yep.
So with all these challenges of different animals, different ecosystems, you were talking about waves potentially splashing and, rocky barnacles and scrambling over rocks. Out of the thousands of photos you have taken, what do you think like the percentage of those photos actually like turn out, right? Like this is an Instagram photo and there's like 4,000 other ones that like didn't make the cut.
Yeah, I would say that depending on the day, if it's a day I've planned for, that I'm gonna go out to Salt Creek and I'm gonna get up at 6 and I'm gonna get there at 9 o'clock for the low tide, and if I've planned it, I'm probably taking 300 or 400 photos, maybe more, but probably 300 or 400 photos, and then I'll go through and maybe 75 of them will be good enough to color correct and edit a little bit, and then maybe 15 or 20 of them get posted. So I would say probably 10 to 15% actually make it onto social media. But yeah, I almost always keep all of my photos, because eventually, even if they're not the best photo, they're likely useful for something. So maybe not all 300 get used, but I'd say at least 150, maybe 200 will get used eventually. So
you need background photos, right? Or like the whoopsie photos.
Yeah.
So we might have some local people to the Puget Sound watching us. We might have people that are from not around this area, so out of state or just not around Puget Sound. So this is gonna be like a 2-part question. Where would you tell locals to go for tide pooling and taking photos? And where would you tell people who are from out of town or like would have maybe like 1 or 2 days where they could spend on the beach?
So, okay. I would say locally, and local being Puget Sound, Washington side of the Salish Sea, we'll say. I would say Salt Creek is always a good bet. Most of the times I've gone out to Salt Creek, which is just outside of Port Angeles, I've found an octopus. So if you're looking for an octopus on a good low tide, that's a good place to go. Fort Erie State Park on Whidbey Island is also really great. It's right where the Strait of Juan de Fuca hits the Puget Sound, and so you get that cold ocean water coming in. So you get a wide variety of algae, and then also, all sorts of invertebrates. It's the only place I've ever seen a stalked jelly, which is a jelly that lives on a rock. So bizarre. So those two places are some of my favorites. Of course, the San Juans also has some great tide pooling locations. Lime Kiln State Park is up there, also kind of on that west side of the islands, so you get that fresh ocean water. And then if you're coming from out of town, I would also recommend all those locations, just because they are kind of the premier spots of the Salish Sea. Other areas throughout the Pacific Northwest that I've tide pooled that I've really enjoyed that aren't necessarily in Washington. Haystack Rock in Oregon, out in Cannon Beach, has puffins seasonally. So if you like tufted puffins, that's where they can be found. Seal Rock State Park down in Oregon, south of Newport, is one of the best places I've ever tide pooled ever. So that's a great spot as well. But yeah, I would say in the Puget Sound and the Salish Sea, anywhere along the Strait of Juan de Fuca or kind of northern Puget Sound is where you're going to find a lot of diversity. That said, here at Redondo, you do find a lot of diversity. It's just a lot of it is below the lowest tides. So if you're a scuba diver, you can find all sorts of cool stuff. But less is visible to intertidal exploring.
Awesome. So when you're going out to these places, you had talked about like knowing exactly what you're going to touch if you're that person that wants to touch things. And I know both of us work in an aquarium, like you need to know how to interact with these animals safely before venturing out. But what guides do you use, or like what are you using to make sure you're actually identifying these animals correctly, whether they're safe or not to be around? So do you have any recommendations, or what do you use?
I definitely have recommendations. Here, got them on the bookshelf next to me. So Wilkes to Whales is a great book by Rick Harbaugh. This is the 3rd edition. Highly recommend. It's got, how many? 525 common marine species to this area. So this is a great book. This one, also a great book, Marine Life of the Pacific Northwest by Andy Lamb. This is the one I go to most often. And so you can see it's been well loved here at the Mass Center. But these two are my favorite guidebooks. I have plenty more. I think on my social media, I just posted for World Book Day of like 6 different books. So if you're looking for them, check them out on social media. But these two are for sure 2 of my favorites.
Great. Awesome. I know we use Wilkes to Whales with the volunteers. So if you've ever asked them, what is in that tank? And they're like, I have no idea. We use Wilkes to Whales to flip through the book because, everything coming through a flow-through system is always new. Plus, we've got volunteers who are 10 years old, so they're just on their journey. So yeah, I definitely, Wilkes to Whales is one of my favorite go-to. It has great photos and is broken up in to phyla. So like flipping through it is super easy. So last question before we run out of time here. As you're working through aquariums and you're working with animals out in their own ecosystem and taking photos, we talked about like what's your most challenging animal to take a photo of. We also talked about like what is like the hardest aquarium. So thinking about all of the animals that you've ever taken photos of, would you rather take photos of animals in the wilds or in an aquarium?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know. I think that I I love them both. I don't think I could tell you one or the other. I think that being in an aquarium, you do have the bonus of knowing what you're going to see. And so you can plan a little bit better. And I'm a bit of a planner, so that is helpful. But there's nothing really like going out to the tide pools and seeing what you can find. So everything equal, I think I would probably lean towards tide pooling, but it's close. It's like a 51-49 percent.
So what I'm hearing is if it's really good weather, the tide is extremely low, you've got proper footwear and everything is, lining up, outside yep. is where to be.
Outside, for sure.
But if it's raining or really, really hot or the tide is really high, that you should come to the Massiner Aquarium to take your photos of your animals.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Amazing. Well, that leads us back to if you all have any questions about this talk or about the Massiner Aquarium, you can visit us at mass.highline.edu or come see us in person Saturdays from 10 to 2. And we'll have public programs throughout the year. So follow us on social media so that you might be able to come and talk to us in person and do an actual tide walk at Redondo Beach. But if you do find any cool stuff that you need help identifying, Emily is definitely the one that I go to when I'm like, I don't know what's in the tank. Can you help me identify this thing? So yeah, definitely. And then just a pitch for people who do like taking photos of animals out in the wild and our scuba divers, we do have our annual underwater photography challenge from August to October 31st. So August 1st through October 31st. Take photos of animals you see underwater at Redondo, specifically Redondo, Washington, not Redondo, California. I don't want to see any sea turtles. You can enter them into our underwater photography challenge, where we will then display the category winners and overall winners up in our exhibit space. So yeah. Anything else before we leave?
No, I think that's great. Yeah, if you have any questions about the talk or about animals, or I'm always happy to ID things. If you send it to Highline Mass Center Aquarium, I'll see it probably. If you send it to my social media, I will definitely see it. So yeah, always happy to hear about crazy animals that people find.
And if you do want to learn about the animals that are around the Puget Sound, definitely follow us on our social media, Highline Mass Center Aquarium, because we have Marine Creature Monday, What Is It Wednesday, Time Lapse Tuesday, Trivia Thursdays, Fishy Friday. So you can learn along with us as you're out there tide pooling. You can, scroll through your Instagram or your Facebook and try to match up to things. But thank you again, Emily, for having this talk with us. And thank you all who joined us today. This will be recorded and up on our YouTube page. So if you want to go back to all of the tips and tricks Emily had about photography and just aquarium stuff, you can go back to that. And that's on our YouTube channel, Mass Aquarium. So thanks, everyone.